So, what do people really want from Marathon? Well, a few weeks ago, Michael and I put together a survey asking this exact question, and a huge number of you responded. The support for this project is much appreciated, and I think the information we collected illuminates some key points of interest within the community for the upcoming game. But before we get into the data, I would like to preface this video with a disclaimer. Neither Michael nor myself are data scientists, or survey researchers, as Google is telling me that's the proper name for the profession. We are just dudes who are interested in what people are feeling, and the audience that we polled is obviously biased in the sense that they probably found out about the survey through this community, which is built around being excited for this game. So, this is by no means definitive or scientific. But with that being said, let's check out what people really want from Marathon. We asked 32 questions and we received 202 responses from people at the time of this recording. The questions range from general thoughts on the game to specifics about game mechanics and mode types. We are going to break the information we received down into 3 sections, that being game sentiment, key details, and insightful feedback. So let's start with game sentiment. The first question was, how excited are you for Marathon on a scale of 1 to 10? And 99% of the responses were a 5 or higher. Only 1% were a 1, and 51.5% of the responses were a 10 out of 10 maximum excitement. But interestingly, the next question, have you played the original Marathon games, was a resounding no. Over half of the people who responded to the survey, most of which were probably 10 out of 10 excited for this upcoming game, have not played the original games, and only 16% have actually beaten the original trilogy, showcasing that the target audience for this new game seemingly is not built on a reliance for a foundational knowledge in the original trilogy. Now that we have this base understanding of the audience who is filling out the survey, we wanted to know if they were interested in a more competitive, high-stakes extraction experience like Tarkov, or something more casual and approachable. And 63% of those who filled out the survey wanted casual gameplay with competitive modes available to them, assumedly thinking something along the lines of unranked and ranked modes. And this makes sense when you look at the other extraction games respondents to the survey had played, as Call of Duty DMZ came in first with 79 of the respondents saying they played it, followed closely by Hunt Showdown and Escape from Tarkov with 63 and 62 respectively, and then right after that was Dark and Darker, Delta Force, and The Cycle Frontier. Though it clearly illustrates that a lot of the people responding have some pretty serious extraction experience, but the large majority of people are coming from the free-to-play or easily accessible extraction market. This also aligns with the results that we got from asking what the preferred gameplay pace would be for respondents, where we saw an overwhelming 65% majority say that they wanted a medium-paced game, that a game that is fast or slow would seemingly be either too sweaty or too tactical to get invested in. We then wanted to know what aspects of Marathon's aesthetic appealed most to the respondents, and we saw that almost half, or 48%, were interested in the graphic style, the graphic realism that was put on display in the Vidoc and original trailer. The next 2 largest categories that appealed to people were the Bungie feel and lore, and you can tell here that there's probably some carryover in this group of people responding to a survey of individuals who played Halo and Destiny and like Bungie as a studio and want to see their take on the extraction genre. Now, since character customization has been a pretty relevant topic of discussion in the community since the IGN article last year about hero shooters, we asked how important is character customization for you in Marathon. Only 3% of respondents ranked it as a 1, with basically the other 97% ranking it a 5 or higher, with half of all responses indicating 10 out of 10 importance for character customization. And we will dive deeper into what exactly people want to customize in the next section, but the relevance here is that it seems to be an important factor for many players interested in playing the game. Now, let's conclude the game sentiment section with talking about pricing. We asked the question, how important is the pricing of the game or its in-game content to your decision to play? And I found these responses pretty interesting because we got a pretty broad spread. It was a 1 to 10 scale, and 16% of people gave it a 1, 16 gave it a 5, 12% said that it was a 10, and the other results were scattered pretty evenly throughout, kind of indicating that pricing isn't as relevant of a component in the grand scheme of things for the people who are interested in playing the game. While on the fringes, we might have people who totally doesn't matter to and people that it's very important to. It seems like if the content is priced generally within the realm of reasonable for what's being given, it's not going to be a huge factor in terms of how people determine whether or not they're going to play. This sentiment was seemingly reflected in our follow-up question, which was, what price point would you prefer for Marathon, with almost 60% of people saying they would like a $40 price tag, which is kind of in the middle, where it's not a free-to-play experience, so you're getting some premium attributes to the game, but also it's not a full $70 massively sized AAA game. Our final question about pricing had to do with the Battle Pass. We asked specifically, would you consider buying a Battle Pass or seasonal progression system? And as you would probably expect, given that everyone knows that this is a live service game, almost 80% of people said that they either would buy it or would possibly buy it. My big takeaway from these questions regarding general sentiment around the game are that people are excited, and that excitement is pretty disconnected from an interest in the original series. This excitement, though, does not seem impervious, as predatory pricing, lack of customization, or unapproachable game mechanics could turn people away from the game. Based on these results, it seems important for Bungie to maintain visual consistency with the graphic realism shown in the trailer, and to create an extraction experience that can be enjoyed by a wider audience than what is currently available within the niche. These components, alongside some level of customization and acceptable pricing, could be the keys to the game's initial success. Now that we have a pretty broad understanding of what people want from the game, let's get into more specifics and talk about some key details. For these questions, we tried to focus in on very specific aspects that are common to the extraction genre at large to see what people would like to carry over to Marathon and how they would like them to play within that game. With the knowledge that Marathon is going to be a PvE experience, we first want to know what kind of combat counters people preferred the most. What we found is that most people were not exclusively interested in one component of that experience. That 62.2% of people who filled out the survey were interested in the interplay between the PvP and the PvE and how that will play out on a map with both of those elements interacting with each other. And this is interesting when you look at the results for when we asked what additional game modes people would like to see added later on. The overwhelming winner was single-player story missions with 128 votes, which seems to indicate that the audience, at least responding to this survey, is interested in a single PvE experience that they can play through to get the story and narrative beats. The second and third most voted for additional game modes were Deathmatch and PvE, with 95 and 94 votes respectively, which makes sense when you look at the success of Tarkov, which added their Arena mode, a deathmatch-style Call of Duty gameplay mechanic for Tarkov, and also the PvE co-op mode, which allows you to drop into the maps and only fight AI enemies as opposed to having to engage in the very tough and sometimes riddled with cheaters Tarkov PvP experience. I also think that it's interesting to note that the fourth highest voted for option was for a Battle Royale mode, which got 33 votes. Now, some of you are probably shaking your head and hoping and praying that they don't turn the beloved Marathon into Fortnite, but I do kind of think that this might be the easiest additional mode to integrate on top of an extraction shooter, as you already have these large maps and larger player counts of individuals loading in, so it would really just be a matter of removing the loot and extraction mechanic and turning it into a large-style deathmatch where you don't start with gear. It's a thought, it could be cool. I guess we'd have to wait and see how the actual gameplay mechanics work to see if that's something that would be acceptable in a battle royale setting. And this response does actually make sense in the context of our next question, which was, what feature do you value most in extraction shooters? And we see here that collecting loot only accounts for 13% of the responses. That means that engaging teamwork, tense combat, and risk-reward decision-making are the things that these respondents primarily enjoy about extraction games, all components that are present in the Battle Royale experience. I think this question illustrates the fact that people are excited about Marathon because they love Bungie PvP, which is something that hasn't received a ton of love in Destiny as of late. So getting back to their roots of these prime nostalgic experiences of Halo 1, 2, and 3 being these massive multiplayer bonanzas, I think that's something that people are really excited to get to experience as a primary focus from Bungie. Next, we asked people if they planned on playing Marathon solo or with a group, and over half of the respondents said that they planned on playing solo, with only 26% or roughly a quarter saying that they were intending on playing it as a trio. And I believe that the responses to this question are more based on the general extraction experience as it stands right now, where extraction games are a little obtuse, hard to get into, or not available to wider audiences. So people who end up engaging with the games or playing them for significant amounts of time tend to do so on their own, or at least they don't always have a friend available who's willing to jump into this very sweaty, hardcore experience. Hopefully, Marathon is something that bridges the gap, as I've found with my extraction shooter experience that it is always more fun with friends or a group. Or maybe they can hone in on getting good ping systems or emotes that allow players to express themselves and convey complex ideas about what they're looting or where they're going on the map without having to be in a party chat or playing with their friends. Hopefully, this is something that Bungie keys in on as they look to bring the extraction genre to a wider audience. Next, we asked people to indicate what kinds of progression systems they preferred in extraction games, and I'll be honest, I don't know if we got a lot of relevant data from this question, as it seems like generally everybody wanted all of these components. Specifically, we asked about character progression, weapon and equipment progression, mission/objective progression, faction reputation or standing, loot and resources, and narrative, and they all, within a few percent, seem to be things that people want. These are all the standard forms of progression within extraction games that we have seen, and I assume this question might change once we know a little bit more about the specific mechanics within the game. And now we get to the juicy stuff. The hero shooter topic has been hot ever since the IGN article from last year, and we found out about Joe Ziegler coming over to Marathon, and we wanted to know if people wanted to see unique player roles or classes in the game, kind of like what Joe Ziegler hinted at in his dev update from October. And what we found out is that 66.7% of people would like to see that, and assumedly think that specific classes like a medic, a scout, a tank, etc. would be a benefit to the PvP experience that you would have in an extraction shooter. I think that there is absolutely a place for classes or even specific abilities attached to these characters that could really work. Obviously, it's dependent upon how the game's mechanics were built, and if they were built around this concept, it could be a really rewarding experience to understand the enemy players in your lobby and also what your capabilities are and how you respond to the dynamic and shifting nature of an extraction map during the round. To follow up on this point, we asked people what kind of customization do they expect in the game, and although all of the top 4 results were very close, they were abundant, with between 156 to 172 votes each. We saw character features, character fashion, gear, and weapons expected to have customization. Obviously, I think gear and weapons are a no-brainer within an extraction game, as the materials, items, and things you usually bring from inside the game world back to your stash, vault, hideout, or whatever it is, are the items that are going to allow you to perform better in the next runs. is, and that ultimately comes down to what weapons you're carrying and what kind of gear you're utilizing. Now, whether we'll get character fashion or feature customization is yet to be seen, but given what Joe Ziegler had said about these specific runners being kind of assigned, like it seems, classes, I don't know if we'll be able to have that kind of character feature customization that people may have hoped for after the original Vidoc. We then asked if people would like to see weather effects or time of day changes in the game, and 87.4% of people said that they would want to see it. And I think this is kind of a no-brainer, as anything that provides variation to maps that you're assumedly going to play many times is a welcome thing within the PvP world. Next, we asked what type of extraction mechanics people would like to see in the game, and 53.6% of people wanted dynamic extraction points, or extraction points that change round to round, meaning that the point that you leave the game each round is different from the last round you played. Now, these could potentially be on a set series of location that you just get a different one assigned to you each round, or they could be entirely randomized at different points on the map. The next two largest options, respectively, that people chose were objective-based extraction, or those tied to completing an objective prior to being able to extract, and traditional extraction points, where there are standard set locations on the map that you must get to leave after you've collected your loot or completed your task. The desire for these dynamic extraction points is probably tied to the vision that was put on display in the original Vidoc that we received at the end of the ARG. Now, it'll be interesting to see how much of what was presented in that Vidoc has changed, as we're coming up on 2 years since the release of that video. But if we're going based off the concept art that was shown back in October, it seems like thematically and aesthetically things are very similar to what was promised. But we won't truly know until we see some gameplay or get a better understanding of the game's mechanics. Now, somewhat along the lines of the question earlier about what additional game modes people would want, we asked people what types of additional content they would want after release. And people seem to be most interested in additional maps, followed by story expansions, then cosmetics or skins, and then new classes. And this kind of all makes sense when you look at the progression of games like Hunt or Tarkov, who over time have added additional maps to play and additional characters or weapons that alter the standard modes of play that were presented in earlier iterations of the games. I don't feel like this question alone provides any particular insight about what types of additional content really need to come to the game, but I do think that it illustrates a very clear point that additional content is going to be mandatory. If Marathon is operating as a live service extraction shooter game, there has to be planned content going out multiple seasons ahead prior to release that are basically locked in, because missing even just one season or content drop could be highly detrimental to a live service game. Next, I want to talk about the responses we got for the question, how important is a ranked or competitive mode to you on a scale of 1 to 10? And we got a pretty even spread here, with 35 respondents saying 1, 34 respondents saying 5, and 28 respondents giving it a 10, with basically the other numbers having equivalent scattered responses. Kind of showing that we're a little bit spread on this topic or concept, that a competitive mode is seemingly valuable to people just as much as it's not valuable to another faction of the community. Now, this may be more indicative of the individuals we polled, as here on this channel and in this community, we're pretty chill people who aren't necessarily sweating over competitive ranked modes in games super frequently. But I do think it's key here that regardless of whether or not there's a ranked mode, I think this does show that other aspects of the game are probably going to be more relevant to the community at large. And the final question that I want to cover in the key details section is, out of the factions we are currently aware of, which is your favorite? And this is a little close to my heart, as I'm a little bit obsessed with the narrative of Marathon, and I think it's interesting that we got a pretty even spread of responses, with Traxxas fairly being the least favorite, with only 13% of people saying that they preferred Traxxas. The winner by only a small fraction was Sekiguchi with 34%, and the UESC had 25% roughly, and Maito received 28% of the votes. So it's interesting to see that Sakaguchi is the preferred faction, as I kind of see them as the silent but deadly megacorp, as opposed to Traxxas being pretty overtly evil. Sakaguchi seems maybe just as sinister, but a little more hiding their hand, trying to maintain a good relationship with the UESC, while, under the table providing Traxxas with weapons of mass destruction in the S-Class Biomata. But I do see you Midas supporters out there, and when I encounter you on runs, I'll be sure to lend a helping hand. Now, I'm not going to give my cumulative thoughts on this section just yet, because I think we should cover the insightful feedback section before I dive a little bit deeper into what I believe the key details revealed to us about the expectations for the game. So let's look at some of the most interesting lawn answer responses we received from the survey. And we're going to start with a few responses that we got to the question, what excites you most? This respondent says, what excites me most is the fact that it's just something new from Bungie. I'm a big Destiny fan, and I'm really looking forward to what would come next from the studio. The world is what interests me the most, and I am really looking forward to see how these stories are told. Another respondent said that it is the beautiful yet deadly kill or be killed high-octane combat, and another respondent said that the artwork was what initially drew me to the game. The fact that it's a shooter, a genre I've enjoyed my whole life, definitely helped as well. But after a while, discovered your channel and found myself completely hooked on the lore too. On that same note, somebody also responded that they want the story and lore to actively change the game. An example is if the objective of that season was to take down a structure, then after that season, it will always be destroyed. And another respondent said that they would like to see faction wars every season, where it's a battle for territory over loot. Interesting. I think these three responses do summarize a lot of the other responses we received for this question, because Bungie is a very known and respected brand, and the combination of this very striking visual style alongside the high-octane combat of an extraction shooter seems to be the point of primary intrigue for a lot of people. The next lawn answer question that we asked was, what is one feature from another extraction game that you would like to see in a marathon? One respondent said they would want to see proximity chat, another said Valorant's anti-cheat in the lobby system similar to Helldivers 2, and another was boss fights or zones with unique enemies like in Dark and Darker, where you can encounter bosses which can whoop yo ass. Proximity chat popped up quite a few times when we were going through the responses that we got on the survey, and anti-cheat has been a big deal ever since the Vidoc, where they talked about what kind of emphasis they were putting on the Fog of War and anti-cheat systems when they were making the game back then. And boss fights or zones with unique enemies sounds absolutely delightful, especially when we saw the appearance of the Svit in the trailer, which I think could operate as a very sick boss-style enemy who maybe is a little bit harder to deal with. Next, we wanted to know what people's biggest concerns for the games were. One person responded that they're worried that it will not be appealing enough to gain the player count needed to push the developers to improve and update the game. Another response said that, quote, my biggest concern is its longevity, that at any point Bungie could pull the plug on the servers and we'd be left with nothing. For this reason, I would hope for an offline PvE mode or story mode. Another respondent also said that the lack of character customization is their biggest concern. I want to be able to create a character with a decent amount of features to make them look like me. These concerns were pretty consistent with the other concerns noted throughout the survey, primarily the genre of extraction shooter and the fact that it's a live service game, combined with a little bit of movement away from what was potentially shown to be how the game operated in the Vidoc. And lastly, we asked respondents if we missed something, if there was something that we didn't ask about in the survey that they just needed to get off their chests, and we got some pretty good responses. One person said, microtransactions should be cosmetic-based only. Paid expansion/map segment the community and are always a bad idea. Another said, marathon needs to feel good to play. No super fast double sprint, slide canceling nonsense. Guns need to feel good to shoot. Loot needs to be rewarding. And defeating another team of runners needs to be challenging but fair, fun, and worthwhile. Another respondent said that they really want the game to capture the sense of dread and mystery. I love the idea of dropping onto a vibrant planet's surface, then fighting through abandoned colonies and underground facilities, deeper and deeper into ancient alien ruins where you don't know what's lurking around the next corner. Another said, I want Marathon to be a little more beginner-friendly compared to other extraction shooters. My forte is hunt, and really getting into it took like 200 hours. I want to see the ways that Bungie will or won't make the game more easily accessible for beginners to the extraction genre while keeping the skill ceiling high and the combat intense. I am super grateful to everybody who filled out the survey and left these very thoughtful responses. I feel like reading through them was super helpful, and there are some conclusions that I came to specifically about what the community desires, and that would not have been possible without you guys. So before I jump into the conclusion here, I just want to say thank you. With everything that we've seen from the survey, I think a few things are very clear about what people want from the upcoming game. First, we can tell that for this audience, there is a great amount of excitement for this game, and this seems to stem from people's infatuation for Bungie, their interest in the narrative, and their interest in a complex AAA PvP experience. Although the extraction genre is niche, and Joe Ziegler himself said that the game won't be for everyone, many appear to be viewing Marathon as their jumping-in point for the genre. All of this seems compounded by how visually striking the trailer and art release for the game was, which has drawn a following of its own, almost entirely separate from those who care about playing some extraction game. We also found that despite people's willingness to play an intense extraction game, there is a large amount of people who wish to see the game expand into alternate modes that will allow you to investigate the world outside of the confines of PvP. Another interesting thing was that it seems like customization is very important, and while some people were clearly opposed to the hero shooter concept, it seems like the majority of people would be content with a class-based system that allows you to customize your runner to your style of gameplay. Also, it seems like people excited for this game don't really care about whether or not it follows the narrative of the original games in a direct way. More so that people want to see a compelling story told within the Marathon universe. We also saw that while people are open to battle passes and cosmetics, their primary interest lies in additional maps and story content. Feels like these expectations should be attainable by Bungie. With a focus on environmental storytelling and a modular system that allows the game to be easily accessed and changed throughout seasons, Bungie could very well be building this from the ground up to make it efficient to support long term. I feel like there is a void in the market currently, where the easy to hop into multiplayer experiences are either stagnant or riddled with a host of issues external to the game itself. If Bungie can fulfill on its promise of making a solid shooter that provides a well-thought-out narrative in a highly supportive live service format, then this game could be the biggest multiplayer experience for years to come. Hopefully, they are listening right now. And I would like to once again say thank you to everybody who filled out the survey and left these very thoughtful responses. I truly appreciate it. The video would not be possible without you. The community that we have here would not be possible without you. And you are now ingrained in the annals of Marathon history as some of those who bravely spoke out about what you expect in the upcoming game prior to its launch. All right, everybody. Thank you. Bye.